Today on the Videomaker Podcast, Chris and I answer your questions. Some of the topics we discuss, should you buy Premiere or Final Cut Pro or Resolve in 2020? Is now a good time to buy a camera considering what's going on with the coronavirus? Should you shoot RAW? Is Nikon, Sony, Canon, or Panasonic the brand to beat? And what's the best way to improve your next video? All that and more coming up. But first, I want to quickly make you aware of Videomaker's email newsletter. It's full of great Videomaker articles covering the art and technology of video production. You'll find how-to articles, articles that cover the concepts and principles of visual storytelling, reviews of the latest video cameras and software, a roundup of the latest video news, buyer's guides that cover everything from camera support, computers, field monitors, and tons more. Plus, if you want to get alerts about our free instructional webinars and receive invitations to our in-person networking events across the United States, the Videomaker email newsletter is the best way to stay up to speed. Sign up today at videomaker.com/newsletter. That's videomaker.com/newsletter. Now, on to the show. Welcome to the Videomaker Podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm. With me, as always, to my left is Chris Monlex.
Hello.
And no one to my right today. Nicole is busily working away on editorial text. This is kind of a bonus round, like a bonus lightning round episode here.
Yeah.
Plan here is to do a few Q&A questions. We get these occasionally in email or on social media. So figured it'd be a good time to just like rocket through a few of these. We've got a lot here. We'll get through as many as we can. Before we get into it, though, just a quick reminder, if you are listening to the podcast and you like it, we'd love it if you went over to iTunes and gave us a 5-star review. We learned actually that you can leave the review without writing text if you would like. That is still helpful to us. So head on over to iTunes and do that. It's a big, big help. And that's it for announcements. So I say we dive right into it.
Let's do it.
So the big question really right now is the one that we don't really know the total answer to, but I figure we could take a stab at it. The one we're maybe a little more most nervous about answering. The question is now a good time to buy a camera considering what's going on with the coronavirus?
As long as you wash your hands first.
Before you go into the store.
Yeah, and then only touch the box that you get. No. I mean, yes and no, but more widely than spreading disease, we're really talking about supply, right? I mean, what is this outbreak meant for the video production or the digital imaging world right now? And I think the really big thing is that a lot of electronics are made in China, and China has been affected by this for a lot longer than we have here in the States. And is it going to affect the supply, and is it a good time to buy, meaning are there good deals coming, or are supply not going to be available? What do you think, Mike?
Well, I think the supply really is the big question, and you know, most of these companies are Japanese, with the exception of Blackmagic, I guess. So you might think, well, the Japanese they're not Chinese, and maybe Japan doesn't have that much of an issue. But actually, I believe in a lot of cases, these cameras have, thousands of components inside of them, and not all of those components are built inside Japan.
Yeah, I mean, they're assembled in Japan, and that's, I went to Tokyo for the Z6 and Z7 announcements about a year and a half ago, and although they didn't really want to give us the percentage of parts that were inside those cameras that were made outside of Japan, China's pretty much the supply for all the little things that go inside it. You know, the amount of parts, they're all put together by Japanese people, and they're all designed by Japanese, but they're, all the parts, just like, it kind of reminds me of Apple phones, although they're assembled in China, it's one of those things where they're using their engineering and then using the large amount of affordable labor in China to make all the parts, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now, important thing to consider here is, a camera is a non-essential, right? So it's not like we're talking about. Yeah. Well, a specific camera. I mean. But in the sense that it's not like trying to find hand sanitizer right now, which is really quite difficult.
And toilet paper.
Yeah. I don't know why the toilet paper thing is a thing, but
well, you don't want to run out of toilet paper.
That's right. Yeah, I guess that's true. Why isn't there a toilet paper shortage all the time then?
Yeah, right.
No, but if you use an old camera for the next 6 months, that's okay. That being said, if there is a specific like brand new camera that you want, you probably should just go ahead and buy it, unless you're just nervous about the economy. And maybe there is reason to be nervous about the economy right now, but perhaps if that's the case, maybe we could look forward to some discounts coming soon. But
we're worried about NAB being affected. So far, big brands have pulled out, but pretty soon, if say it doesn't happen, there's going to be a lot of announcements that have been planned for years. The process of planning for a camera, from the product development, all the different aspects of it. These brands have been planning for a long time to be announcing these things, and if they don't get a chance to announce them when a lot of people are listening, they're going to be trying to find other ways to do that. And maybe that's going to be trying to contact you through stuff like our brand. But it might also be that they're giving rebates to sell and move product because, they're going to be hit by not only being able to not make more, but once they run out, there's not more money to be made until they can get all those parts. And, you can only, it might even be just a screw or a spring, but until they either find someone else to send it to them, or they get the parts there from where they're headed, that's going to be an issue. I'd say, if it's in stock and you want to buy it and it's not going to affect your bottom, if you already plan to buy it and you're just going, I'm worried about this kind of stuff. Well, we will need footage of the outbreak. So make sure you have a camera for that. But I don't think that there's a lot to worry about other than supply. So if you are wanting to buy something hot that is just going to be announced soon and you need it to make money or those kinds of things, get on it. If you could hold off, you might have to hold off longer than the actual epidemic is around, really. Once everybody gets back to work and things get going again, it's going to take a while to get the everything going again. They're going to have to make the parts, then ship the parts. There's going to be a delay there, not just from health of not being around, which right now certain things are just not happening. People are locked in their house, so it's going to be a period of time. Kind of reminds me of like when strikes happen, like writer strikes or whatever. It's like they happen, things aren't being produced, but we still see new television. What's the deal? And then all of a sudden we'll have like 6 months of no new stuff because it takes time to make stuff, right? So maybe they have enough parts to continue making stuff in Japan right now, but they might run out at some point. And really depends on the duration of time the which their suppliers are without. But I'd say go for it.
I mean, the most confident thing we can say is that economists suspect that there's going to be supply issues from Japan, like broadly, right? Yeah. Not just cameras. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy, so we don't know if there's going to be discounts coming up. But we do know that there is going to be supply issues generally.
And you said supply from Japan, but you meant more
yes,
China.
I meant China.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty. If you're thinking about buying, and you have the liquidity, you should get it. You should get what you want to get and get to using it. Maybe there'll be a whole bunch of time in your room that you get to use it. Maybe it's a good time for training. I think that's more than anything, just trying to be mindful of how your time might be if, say, the U.S. has a lot of quarantine to deal with.
Yep. Okay, maybe we'll head on to the next question. So next question here, Premiere versus Final Cut in 2020. And actually we should probably also throw in here Resolve, I guess, which is really a contender for, what people should really use. Yeah,
and whenever we're considering best products and stuff, those are the three names we're considering. You might consider Avid, but I think Avid's far more of a hyper local to the LA area.
Yeah, it's really kind of an enterprise level.
It's where industry that requires that workflow, and Hollywood has not left Avid at all. They still have a lot of workflow they have to deal with that, but in other places they long ago left Avid, and so they're you're choosing between Final Cut and Premiere, and now Resolve that you can get for free, but not quite the same. The free version is not quite all of the bells and whistles. $300 gets you the same thing, or gets you the full functioning version. And perpetual licensing for Adobe is what, $50 or $60 a month?
I think it's $50.
I'm going to look it up. And then Final Cut, since 10 has come out, it's been $300, and they continue to give updates. If
you bought it in 2011, you have the newest version today.
Yeah.
I mean, they're updating, although it feels like the updates have kind of slowed, haven't they?
Yeah, I think they had some big catching up to do on the back end of stuff that to make it so they could support the next bit depth and resolution and whatnot. But they're just kind of keeping it up with the Joneses. Like, they're not offering huge, really cool, innovative ways to do stuff. They're just making sure their stuff works solidly. So really, I mean, I think the question really comes down to how much you want to spend. I think what you know how to use really matters. So, if you've spent a lot of time learning Final Cut, you're going to have to invest in some time to transfer over to Premiere or to Resolve. I think it's really easy to think I'm going to switch over to Resolve because there can be a no-cost upgrade there or sideways go. I really wish that there was a paid option for, like, you could just buy outright the Adobe, even if it was stupid expensive. I wish you could buy it just so you could actually compare ones that cost money versus ones that are a monthly expenditure.
Well, you can hardly do that with Apple never charging you for any update. I mean, what's the annual cost of Final Cut Pro X if you bought it in 2011?
Yeah, zero.
I mean, well, it's $30, I guess, right?
Over 10 years or whatever. Yeah. And so there's that, but then it's just but the big thing is, of course, who's getting the Adobe Creative Cloud or getting Adobe Premiere only? Adobe wants you to be addicted to their other tools too. I would have a hard time abandoning Adobe for the sake of, I also use Final Cut, I also use Premiere. I also use Photoshop and Media Composer or
After Effects,
Media Encoder. God, man, After Effects. But those are really important to my workflow. And if I didn't have those tools, I'd need something to fill those holes. And especially with Photoshop, there's not a lot of really, there isn't any pegs that fill that hole exactly the same way. Really, no one's done a real great job of doing complete analog. I think there's done a lot of, like Lightroom, and I think there's other that are talking about dealing with RAW and doing those kinds of things. But if you're doing like a lot of touch up and those kinds of work, Photoshop's just been the basic for it. And same with like After Effects. After Effects is one of those things I have a lot of time. I have 10 years of using After Effects. If I needed to move to another program to do it, how long would it take me to get to the same working knowledge that I have with After Effects? It'd take a long time because there's a lot of little things that I've learned that are, good workflow things and whatnot. So it just becomes really difficult to justify the training. And I think Adobe knows they have you by the hairs there. They know that you have a lot of training to involve to switch over. Plus, they just have their whole little ecosystem. However, Resolve has a 3D text animator. It has a full audio editor inside it. You have a full, definitely a lot of really robust color tools, and then obviously just a non-linear editor. Blackmagic wants to get you in with the free so that you want to buy their cameras and other things, right? So it's like their way of getting you in. And each brand seems to have their own way of targeting and bringing people in. I think Resolve is just the justification of it. Costs nothing to start learning it. And other than nodes, which do take a little bit of mindset change, it's not a huge, it's not like the magnetic timeline of Final Cut to get used to. Like there's
really?
a lot.
I feel like layers to nodes is a much bigger jump than, the classic timeline to the magnetic timeline.
Yeah, but how many, but there's a lot of stuff you need to do that doesn't need nodes. You know what I mean? Like you can
That's
get along, you can get into, I think all the rudimentary stuff you're getting already with Resolve, just cuts and that kind of thing. I mean, I hardly use things that are deeper than that. If I do, I'm doing, I'm adding a LUT. I'm not doing a crazy amount of nodes. So the idea of just throwing a node instead of a layer, if it's just one, man, it's simple, easy. But once you start getting more complicated, that's I think also in like the design of animation and stuff like that, it's going to take some time to learn it. But those are included in tabs. So you already have the program open and you just tab over, which I love. So it's not round tripping. It's the same program.
Well, that's common now. I mean, I guess Final Cut doesn't really have it, but Premiere's got it now.
They have different windows for you to look at, but they don't have.
They have the tabs along the top, which basically is just like shortcuts for your workspace layout.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas these are like incorporated programs, so it'd be like including
that's right,
Audition into Premiere and After Effects into Premiere, and so it's just one program opening up. And I'd be curious of like the resources if you're using those versus using the individual programs on a computer. I think it really depends on how it's all set up. But
in my experience, and I haven't used Resolve in a couple versions, truth be told, but Resolve has always been a little bit more resource intensive than the other editors. I'm working on not a high-end editing machine, just like a regular iMac.
Yeah.
And I've always had a little bit of problems with Resolve. Doesn't run on my MacBook Pro, which is kind of old, 2013, but it just literally will not even open. I think that for most people, I mean, it's hard to say that, there's a one-size-fits-all that everyone should get one or the other.
Yeah.
But it's, if you're working with video full-time, I mean, in most circumstances, it's going to be Premiere because you need all those other applications, like you said. Unless you're a full-time colorist, maybe you go Resolve instead. Outside of that, man, I'm hard-pressed to recommend Final Cut Pro over Resolve these days. Yeah,
it's hard. The one good thing that Final Cut has is that it's all optimized for ProRes, right? So if you have a ProRes workflow, you're shooting in ProRes RAW, you're not going to be able to do that anywhere else currently, although support for other editors is coming. You have to deal with that in Final Cut. And you can do a lot more with those ProRes files, but if you're not dealing with ProRes, then you're not really getting much optimization otherwise. If you're using H.265 files, Premiere and Final Cut and Resolve are all going to chug because it's hard to unpack those efficient files, and it just takes a lot of resources to do so. I mean, it's just really interesting. I'd say over any other improvement I've done on resolution, bit depth, switching from H.264 or ProRes to H.265 puts more labor on my computer than anything else I've done. And so I'm trying to transcode anything now these days that's in H.265 because more than 2 layers of it. And I have a really nice iMac Pro that is fully resourced to the 9, and it's still like as soon as I put more than 2 layers of 10-bit H.265 files on top of each other, it gets mad. It doesn't want to play it in real time. It's struggling. I sometimes have to comp 5 or 6 images together to make a graphic of low light or something like that, and man, it just really has a hard time. But transcoding everything from a efficient codec to a inefficient codec is really not a real great idea.
No.
So, these days I'd say, if you're an Adobe user, you're probably stuck. I think you're probably not stuck on the editor, but I think on those other peripheral things. And likely you're already used to the monthly payment, which I think, that was the thing when I was at the TV station that was far easier to deal with, was a monthly expenditure rather than a capital expenditure every year. Getting the okay to spend $1,200 every year as a lump sum was way harder than it was to get that same amount of money divided by 12 every month. And
it's almost a utility at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And so those kinds of things really, it really makes sense. And it's just one of those, the capital expenditures are usually tight pursed, whereas the monthlies are justified. And it's just one of those things that's, it's a mindset. I mean, it's not like the money's any different, but the pocket it's coming out of does affect the way corporate and businesses run. But as a individual, I'd have a really hard time recommending someone getting Adobe the Adobe Creative Cloud just because of the cost. So you have to be able to justify that. Whereas Resolve and Final Cut, $300 investment, and you're all in, and you're done.
But what comes with that, I'm just looking up the release history here for Final Cut. The last major version release, that's 10.x, was December 2017.
Wow.
Yeah. So they've had smaller updates since then, but...
Yeah, well, see, so I had to, I was, 2 things recently. One, I was shooting on the 1DX Mark III, which has Canon Raw Light, but it's different than the Canon Raw Light that's in the C200 because I can't play them in Premiere, and there is only support currently for Final Cut. So I opened them up in Final Cut to transcode them, but I couldn't transcode them out as 12-bit because there's no 12-bit support output out of Final Cut. So definitely one of those things that can be an issue. So I actually use Final Cut more to transcode stuff that doesn't work in other things to get it to my Final Cut, but that's because I give it all, we get it all given to us. If it was coming out of my own wallet, I'd have a really hard time spending more money for the same thing. But that's really the big if the retraining will not cost a lot of money.
The good news is, if you have the money to afford the Creative Cloud, Adobe Creative Cloud, and you just like one of the other two applications, you can use both.
Yeah.
Because Final Cut Pro is so cheap, and Resolve is effectively free. You could get the Creative Cloud for After Effects and Photoshop and Illustrator and Audition and all these other things, and still use the other ones. Okay.
One other thing, though, is that you do get the $300 free program, or the $300, not free program, $300 upgrade on Resolve with like every single Blackmagic product. And like even ones that didn't cost $300, it's really kind of surprising.
Did you get it with that Blackmagic product?
Yeah, the A10 Mini I have right here that I should have sent back yesterday.
Resolve with that?
Yep.
How much is that?
Less than $300.
Okay, so bottom line is, if you need the full version Resolve, buy one of these.
Yeah, find a product that it includes it in and get it.
Let's tell people what that is, actually, just in case. So, I mean, less than $300 is like a little. It's a live switcher.
Four input, one output live switcher that can show up as a USB webcam on your computer, so you can just start streaming with it's relatively simple, but you can program it and stuff like that. But I was surprised when I opened it up and that it had Resolve in it, but it makes sense because they're wanting you to use their workflow and benefit from how, just like Apple does, is that when you're using all of their products together, you get the best strength from those products. So they all compound on each other.
We got to find the cheapest Blackmagic product
that includes
order one and see if it comes with the
like a $100 converter of some sort.
Yeah, probably.
But anyhow, I think that's the way around. I actually have quite a few different copies, and the cool thing is if you have those upgraded copies, little secret is whenever they do an update, you get it too.
Nice.
They don't say that out loud, but if you have a dongle that came with your camera or whatever, I have a dongle that came with the Ursa full size that we got 5 years ago, that we don't even have it in the house anymore, that still works for the newest update. So, and was allowed me to install it on multiple computers and whatnot.
Okay, so the cheapest product I could find on Blackmagic is it's a micro recorder.
Oh, that might have it then.
It's like, oh man, I lost it. $39.
I wonder if that, I don't know. Someone else got to try it out there and let us know if it works or not. But I think, the thing is I think Blackmagic, if you asked really hard, like you sent a compelling email, they might just have like, okay, here. I feel like
software,
they get that they're going to get you some other way if they give you the software, because like I said, it becomes more robust the more of their systems you have. They all work better together. Certain things don't function unless you have the whole ecosystem of their stuff. So it's just it plays out well.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, eh?
Yeah.
A short one, maybe easy to answer. Should I shoot RAW? And we're talking about RAW video here. If you're talking about photos, by the way, the answer is almost always yes.
Yeah, the file size addition of RAW, and of course your ability to capture a JPEG alongside in photos makes it kind of a no-brainer. Yep. You're not really making that much data unless you're shooting on A7R4, to which I actually created more data shooting photos than I did video. But that was because I was shooting like super high-speed continuous files at the highest quality. But I digress. RAW video, on the other hand, is becoming more and more available at a cheaper price point, right? So, I mean, $1,200 is what you can get the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. You can get 4K RAW, right? And not all RAW is the same, so that's one thing. But I'd have to say, just in general, most people don't need RAW.
Yeah, unless you're like making a narrative film, you want to do a lot of color grading, or you're using like a Red, which has just an incredible RAW format.
Yeah, which is very efficient, which is not typical for RAW. I mean, so the RAWs that are out there, we have Blackmagic RAW, which is their kind of RAW. We have Cinema DNG, which is really in essence just a lot of photos, and then they go together as a video. We have ProRes RAW, which of course is actually more efficient than ProRes by like 50%. So the files are smaller and you can get more image data. And then you have Redcode RAW. I don't think there's Cinema Raw Lite. I'm trying to think. I don't know if there's what RAW from Panasonic.
Ooh,
I'm not sure. Or ARRI. ARRI definitely has their own, but those are high end. And if you're shooting on an ARRI, you're shooting
Lumix
on a
RAW.
Lumix RAW. So you might need it. But here the big deal is, for me.
Oh, that's photos.
I shoot RAW far more often than I should. Most of the time it's when I'm testing a camera. And I've found that by the time I'm done grading, if I didn't need the dynamic range from, this even comes down to log. I'd say log and RAW kind of somewhat go hand in hand, being that RAW is usually, it's raw image data, sensor data, so you're going to have no contrast and that kind of thing, so you're going to have to add a lot to it. But that if you don't want your production to take longer in post-production, then shoot with all the color there. It's...
it really comes down to how much time do you have after you're done shooting to publish.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could add a third more time to your edit just because you have to grade everything. Not because you shot it wrong, you have to do a lot of work to get it right. It's just that you have to grade everything.
Yeah, to get it to be usable.
To be normal again, right? Just to be typical. So you're adding a step in your process. Now, that step is very robust and strong, and a lot of times you might need it. But what I would say is use it when you need it, and don't use it when you don't, if that makes enough sense. And
in a lot of cases, I think people are going to find that they don't need it most of the time.
Yeah, a producer that used to work here, Greg Olson, he works at the school at the local college here, and they don't have a storage issue or anything like that. They just have a time crunch, and they're like, no, we don't have time for the workflow of RAW. We shoot everything as we want to see it, and if we can't capture it that way because of limitations of dynamic range or whatever, we might switch to RAW for that shot and then grade to match that shot to all the rest of the ones we do. But you hardly ever stay in that. You would shoot it because the dynamic range of that scene was hard, or you had some other thing you needed to do, or what have you.
Now, what do you think of the approach of just like shooting everything in RAW and then, settling on a LUT that you like and then just applying that in bulk?
You could do that.
And that way you can go back and, tweak with the image if you need to.
It's all about data management. So really,
oh, yeah, that's true.
If you have storage, cool, but terabytes of storage isn't going to get you far. I shot a project that shot three 3-minute videos. They were all interviews. I shot one interview it took about 2 hours to shoot the interview, and I shot a bunch of B-roll, probably about 40-50 minutes worth of B-roll for these 3 interviews, and the project was almost 3 terabytes. And that's to make 3 3-minute videos. 9 minutes total of edited content was 3 terabytes. And I guarantee you, if I didn't shoot that in RAW, and that was Canon RAW Lite, which is gigabit a second is the data rate. So that's, and so, if I would have shot that on the C200, which is what I shot it on in the H.265, I don't think I would have broke 500 gigs. I bet you I would have been under 300 gigs or smaller for that same project, and I ended up grading and spending a bunch of time grading when I probably shouldn't have. I'm definitely, I love RAW, and I love the latitude you have if you've made a mistake to correct it and all those kinds of things, but it's heavy to hold on to, so you might want to transcode. But that's what I think is, if your camera can shoot RAW, cool, use it when you need it, and don't when you don't. So use it when the situation, you pull it out and use it when you don't know how this is going to turn out, or I need a little more latitude, I need more dynamic range, because you're going to get those things from RAW. And usually, typically, you're going to get more color data information, right? So like RAW is typically 10 or 12 bit. So if you're doing that, then you're getting a lot more color than shooting at an H.264 or 8-bit file. But it's not worth the added time if the final video isn't, it really depends on your budget. You're shooting a narrative and you have a budget for storage and all those kinds of things, and you're going to need an archive and all that kind of stuff, and you have some money for do it. But
if you're a YouTuber, you're putting out a video a week
or every day or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it just doesn't make any sense. I think even
that's probably why so many YouTubers are shooting with their mobile phones.
Totally. Well,
super compressed image,
Yeah, and all you have to do is cuts, right? I mean, even weddings, unless you're getting paid for a high-end wedding, which totally is a thing, but that, that it's likely, you shot a wedding, a real-time event, and you had, 3 to 5 hours of footage on one camera. That's so much data. I mean, that's just an incredible amount of data.
That's one of those things where if I was a wedding videographer, I would really try to avoid shooting RAW for that reason. Although I actually think there's something to be said about, wedding videographers just not holding on to that old footage that, is left on the cutting room floor. But
that's true.
But that set aside, if I was shooting a family member's wedding, I would shoot it at the highest possible resolution in RAW, just to maintain the most accurate representation of what transpired as possible.
Totally. And here's the thing I would say in that situation for weddings, I'd shoot log so I could get more dynamic range and I could grade, because likely you're going to do weddings tend to have a lot of rich color, and that's part of the look. Just like wedding photos are usually really heavily edited, so is your footage going to be. And so having that latitude and dynamic range, wonderful. But do you need to have the raw data? Maybe not. If I'm choosing between 8-bit, 10-bit, and 12-bit, being that 8-bit is H.264, 10-bit is H.265, and 12-bit is raw, I'm probably going to choose the middle of the road. I'm going to try to transcode that H.265 so my computer can handle it better. But that's like happy medium. Like 8-bit, if you shoot something wrong, like your exposure is bad, there's no recovering. What you see is what you get. You're really not going to be able to pull those highlights back. Your shadows are going to be dark or noisy. It's just the essence of it. But as soon as you set up to 10-bit, you have a little bit of latitude, and that's really nice to have. But do you need a lot of latitude? Well, only if the situation is so dynamic that you need that. Otherwise, be a good shooter and choose the right exposure for the situation.
Yeah, and I think that actually there's something to be said about, especially on less expensive cameras, shooting RAW could encourage a shooter to become lazy in a sense.
Totally. If I'm capturing, it's like if I had a 360 camera that shot RAW in some high resolution, I could have everything, right? Yeah, except for everything was shot through a wide angle lens. I mean, there's just so much stuff that you think, I'm going to do this so I can have a lot of options in post. And, really what you end up doing is just not making creative decisions as you go, and your art is going to suffer because you're not being deliberate on what you're trying to achieve. I would still always think it through and be deliberate. Whatever your choice is, it's not a wrong choice if you thought it through. It's the choice you've made. But I'd say 75% of the time when I'm shooting for my work, RAW is not going to be beneficial and not going to add to my production. The stand up of me sitting here, or the A-roll of me talking to the camera, is not going to turn out any different because I'm shooting in a very well lit location with control over everything. I should have used the lights differently if I needed to shoot RAW.
Yep.
Now I can shoot RAW just because I have it on the camera, but what's the point other than making a lot of data and hoping that you're saving it for the future or whatever? Yeah, if it's for a personal project and that kind of thing, the big thing here though is, can your computer even handle it? And every single camera manufacturer has their RAW footage to be able to download some footage from it. I know the Red has one for every one of their cameras, and in the different compression settings and that kind of thing. Get those, although you're not going to do anything, and just see how they play in your edit system. Because likely is you're going to want to use RAW as sparse as you can because it makes your computer really bogged down.
Yeah, so there's a lot of downsides to RAW certainly, and a few upsides, but the upsides are pretty big.
The upsides are great, and it's just if you have the budget for it, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but it adds to the cost in time to your edit and into your storage. Otherwise, yeah, go for it. I mean, if you're shooting on a Red though, you're always shooting RAW. I mean, I don't know why you'd ever.
Well, if you're shooting on the Red, you're probably not the person who's asking this question.
True, but like their RAW is so efficient that you don't have to make those choices because, cool, I have something that plays well, that is completely raw. That I can change the ISO in post and
workflow is super easy.
Super good. Everything's really efficient in the way it works and everything. I mean, this isn't an advertisement for Red, but they do. I mean, I feel like the definition of RAW for me is hanging on Red Code RAW, and everybody else is just a perverted version of that.
Well, I think it's the best, but I don't know if it's the definition in the sense that it is compressed.
It is, but RAW is just such a marketing term. It's like, is it sensor data? Is that what you're getting? Okay, cool. Red Code RAW can be uncompressed, but their compression is efficient enough that there's not a lot of loss for it.
Right. Once you get the uncompressed version, then you're back to the main problem of massive files.
So, but the cool thing is you have like 15 different amounts of compression. You can do 20 to 1. You could do 2 to 1. You can, there's so many, there's such a wide range of amount of compression versus like H.265. Yep. That's the amount of compression you're getting, So, it might, it's just one of those things that if you have all the resources to be able to play back and edit that stuff, and you have all the storage, RAW's always going to be better to start with, but it has all sorts of unforeseen issues that if you don't have addressed are going to be a pain in the butt to deal with.
Yep. Okay, bouncing around here. Let's go to one that maybe is a little bit more broad, I guess. What is the best way to improve my next video? So we're missing some details here, which is like, what's your video look like now? Yeah. But I think that if this is a beginner or an intermediate, actually, I would say any intermediate or lower experience level, the two things that I always see that could almost always use improvement are audio and lighting.
Yeah. I always just think of the rudimentaries as something that everybody could benefit from, regardless if you're a professional or a beginner. Going back to those typical things of, if your audio is right, and I get back even one step further, is your camera level? Is your white balance set properly? Are you in sharp focus? Just those super rudimentary things, because if you do all of those things, it looks professional. If you can expose properly. So, now that's really broad. Expose properly and your video will look better. Well, of course. Yeah. But, you'd be amazed at how much your video is affected if you white balance just a little bit wrong. I know in this room here, most of the hard lights here are all 5000K, and all the rest are a bicolor light, and they're kind of between 5400 and like 4700. So even if I shoot my camera at 5000 Kelvin, I still end up having to change the white balance, and like sometimes you just can't make it look right again. Like if you're that far off, or it just takes a lot of thought. Whereas like if you just have the white balance right when you're shooting it, you don't have to adjust that, and right off the bat, you're going to be working with with better footage than you would have if you would have had to change that in post.
Yeah, so that's particularly challenging when you're working in a situation where you have mixed color temperature. Yeah, it always happens. Always see it. Where there's like this indoor shot where someone's near a window, and you got the bright daylight coming in on one side, and then you've got like a warm incandescent on the other side, and there's nothing you can do to fix that.
Other than you can white balance on the windows and going really deep.
Well, I mean in post, but you could fix it when you're shooting, sure. But But once you've recorded it, you can adjust the color either way, but then the window side is too blue, or the indoor side is too orange.
And you hope your subject doesn't cross over into the blue if you're having to do like a secondary grade on just the window or something like that. Those are the things. But like back to your point of lighting right, just a little bit of time thinking about the light and the audio, but that you're going to get a far more dynamic shot. The same shot lit with a goal, and I always start with the goal of I want good 3-point lighting, and then I'm going to go from there to achieve my next thing. Now that's probably a slow process compared to like if you could just go, this is the way I want to see it, and place lights and that kind of thing. But what it helps me do is that I make sure to get the subject lit as well as possible, and then I can address how everything else looks so that at least my subject matter is lit the way it should. And that is a really big difference between having enough light to get the exposure properly and using your light to sculpt and to get an image to be more dynamic.
Yep. I really strongly believe that, if you're someone who you really want a new camera, the camera that you have is, you feel like it's holding you back, you're shooting with your smartphone even, and you just can't afford whatever the camera it is that you want, spend some time working on your lighting, because good lighting will make up for a crappy camera.
And by good lighting, we're not talking about, sure, it could be a really nice lamp. The light fixture itself could be this high TLC, CRI light.
I'm not talking about, we're talking about your enough technique. Luminance. It's the technique and it's the lighting design. It's
lighting placement, right? And the same thing is for audio is, mic placement is key for all audio sources. If we're talking on these microphones and we're 5 feet away from here, we'd have all sorts of room noise in here. And so we are using the mic properly. I'm sure you've seen a public event or something like that where someone just doesn't know how to use a microphone. Either that's like in their mouth, or it's so far away that
they're like waving it around.
Yeah, or they're like using like a pointer and being like, why can't they hear me? It's like you don't understand how a microphone works. But hopefully we're not working with that kind of understanding. But that mic placement and its proximity to your sound source is so key to getting a clear audio. And the cool thing is there's starting to be technology in the audio world that takes away the gain, that you just don't need. There's no more gain. It has a AD converter for both the high and low end, and you're able to not have any digital clipping. That's rad. But if you didn't have good mic placement, who cares? It didn't clip, but it sounds like junk. You didn't get distortion. Good on you. But we had a podcast recently, and we were talking to a professional audio editor, and he kind of scoffed at the idea that someone would send him audio that was messed up. It's like these days the boom operator, the guy that's people that are handling the audio, like it's their only job to make sure that the proximity and the gain is set on all of their inputs, so that you're not having to deal with it. They don't stick around
if they're
you just don't have a job the next time if you do a bad job. But it's because the jobs are specialized. Whereas for me, I'm also the director, I'm also the cinematographer, and I'm having to place the boom operator and monitor the audio at the same time. So then, it's easy to make mistakes because you're just juggling too many things. But when you have a specialized focused job, that's really important. When I was working at the TV station, we always sent 2 people on a shoot, and one of the reasons was to help move things, just so you could get to one from the one thing to another. But the biggest help was having someone that can monitor the audio all the time. So
it's really hard to direct and listen to the audio levels.
Yeah, they're not paying attention to content. They're making sure the wind isn't causing an issue on that microphone. They're making sure that the input sounds good and has enough presence for what you're trying to achieve. You're actually paying attention to that. So it is really hard to balance all those things. Now, if you take enough time and have enough checklists, you can do it all. It's not like unobtainable. There's plenty of one-man crews that do that all the time, but you enter in more liability for those things to go wrong. But if your lighting is good, your lighting, meaning you're being deliberate with where you're placing your lights, trying to make the subject matter look as good as possible, and your audio is clean, the subject is present, whatever that subject matter is. The sound source can be a car, it could be a person talking, it doesn't really matter. And then just the rudimentaries, making sure your subject is in focus, making sure your white balance is on, making sure your tripod head is level. Those are things that, like, literally, I don't know how many times I've had to, I mean, and I've been shooting video for 15 years professionally, and I still sometimes forget to level the bubble, and I end up having to zoom into my shot a little bit and straighten it. You know, sometimes you just have a lot of stuff you're shooting, and there's this one shot, and you're like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to check off the list when you're shooting, and it's common to make mistakes.
Totally. But you know, the amount of correction you need to make is going to affect the quality of your video. So if you're having to do a lot of corrections in post-production, you're not going to be able to make that video that's best it could be if you just would have captured right at the origination of the video, the audio, and of course the color and the composition of your shot.
So my two easy tips here, assuming you have kind of the fundamentals down, is one, next time you're setting up your lights, or you're figuring out your lighting generally, is pay attention to what your backlight is doing. Yep. Usually putting a nice backlight in is like the difference between pro and amateur lighting, totally. In my opinion.
That's like if you know a noob when there's no backlight.
Yep.
And you know the placement of that backlight, if it's good, because it's tricky. It's probably the most difficult light to place and to make sure it doesn't spill and all that kind of stuff. But if it looks right, you won't notice it, but it'll make all the differences.
Yep, and you can do this, if you're shooting outdoors, this is free. You just position the sun behind your subject. I hear a lot of, a lot of video teachers or photo teachers saying, don't, shoot into the sun. Well, you don't want the sun in the shot.
Yeah.
But the sun can provide a really nice rim light. And as long as you have a key and a fill, which usually comes from some sort of reflected source.
Yeah.
And you don't have like harsh shadows, so you shoot your subject under shade or under a diffuser. Then the sun is like a free backlight. So my other quick tip here is if you're using a camera top microphone like a Rode Videomaker Pro or something, take that thing off of the camera and put it on a boom pole and just get it as close as possible to your subject.
Yeah, or any kind of, like boom pole, you could use a mic stand, you could tape it to a music stand. I mean, getting the microphone closer to your subject is going to make the sound better. It's not the quality of the mic, it's its location to your subject.
Yep. Yeah, those camera top microphones are fine if you're like shooting a vlog and it's, a foot or two away from your face, great. But, if you're shooting something like the distance between Chris and I, which is probably 6 feet, it's not going to sound that good.
Yeah,
so get it closer.
You're gonna have a lot more room noise to deal with, and some rooms sound really fine and they're dead, and that shouldn't be an issue. And you're just gonna have a little bit quieter, and they seem a little distant. But if you're in a racquetball court or indoor basketball court or something like that, like you have hard surfaces everywhere. Yeah. It's gonna sound horrible. The further away you get from your subject, the more weirdness you're going to allow into that microphone. Yep. So, just keep the rudimentaries and, be deliberate about your mic placement and your light placement. And I think those things, if you thought of all those things while you're doing your next project and you hadn't really thought hard about them before, it's going to make a huge impact on your next video.
Yep. Actually, we have we got to find the link. I'll put the link in the description of this podcast. We have a video on the checklist for the things to do when you're setting up your camera right before you hit record.
Yeah.
And it's got all these things. And there's like a very difficult to remember acronym there.
It's like 15 letters or something.
I don't remember exactly, but I'll put the link in.
All right.
Okay, let's see. Last question, I think, today. Nikon, Sony, Canon, or Panasonic, which camera brand is best? And we should throw in Blackmagic there as well, and Red, I guess, and GoPro. There's no best. I mean, that's just like the bottom line, right?
Okay, we're done.
Yeah. You should really go read our buyer's guides on this topic.
It has so much to do with what you're shooting, and we get the question a lot of like, a lot of times it's not that broad, like out of everything, what should I get? It's more of like, we end up getting a budget from someone. They might, I have this much money and I need to get a camera, and I usually always ask, what are you shooting? Because it really does matter, right? Just like your lens selection should matter depending on what you're shooting. So does the camera, because there are benefits, there are reasons that all of these cameras were designed the way they are, and they're different perspectives from each other. And so the user can be benefited or not. I think of everybody was so upset about Canon and crop on their cameras, and yeah, that's an issue. But some lens selection, and it's no longer an issue. There are drawbacks for just about every camera. I mean, no, every camera that's out there, there are issues. Even the Red or the R's, you're talking about, a lot of support. You're talking about expensive tripods. You're talking about, having to have expensive media to record onto, all sorts of issues with every single camera along the line. It really depends on what you're trying to do with it. If you would ask me this 2 years ago, someone said, I shoot a lot of verite, a lot of events that I don't have control over, the lighting or whatever. I need something that does well in low light. And, 2 years ago, I would have gone, well, Sony's your answer. Sony is the low light king. Yet
Sony was really innovating at the time. They were just like the first to the mirrorless market.
Yeah, there's something about a mirrorless camera that allows for better processing of the image, and typically you end up being able to push your ISO above 3200, whereas like you did that on a DSLR, it would have been the ugliest mess you could ever think of shooting at that high. And so it was almost like, why is this even offered? And you think of like Blackmagic that has like 4 ISOs of, 100, 400, and 800, maybe 1600 on their newer cameras, but there's not a lot of options. So, you're low light, but that's not true anymore. All the Panasonic S1, S1H have great low light performance. The Nikons have great low light performance. So now it really depends on what you're shooting. So, this is a ever changing situation. And I'd say before the mirrorless was announced, I would have been like, well, just get a fast lens, get a lens with a low F number. But that becomes troublesome to, have enough depth of field for your subject matter too. If you're shooting at night at 1.2, you're going to see, the shine on the nose, and everything else is going to be out of focus. So it's just, it's one of those things, what gives the best bang for your buck?
It depends on your use case. Totally. So, I think you could say, again, 2 years ago, you could say, one, Sony is the major innovator here, and they're like leading the way in mirrorless. And for video cameras, it's like Sony's the way to go. And at the same time, Canon's asleep at the wheel. They were like late to 4K, and things are cropped. Nowadays, though, actually, Canon has kind of caught up and surpassed in some ways, especially with the 1DX. And like even Nikon is like just like some incredible deals. Like the Z6 is just like such an incredible value. And Nikon has just been so good about putting everything they can for video into like a more affordable camera. Yeah,
it's funny because Nikon, whenever I talk to someone that's a video shooter, not someone that's been a photographer, is they go, Nikon? I've never even considered Nikon. And it is. They're one of those, they don't have a cinema camera line like Sony and Canon and Panasonic have. So, they don't necessarily, they're not selling camcorders. So, there's a lot of like, oh, what, this is weird. But I think because of that, they threw all of the things that you could do into one camera. And, there are a few things that surpass its even competitor, which is like the A7 III versus the Z6. They're the same exact price, and Nikon gives you more value. However, the safer bet is to go with Sony, right? Because how many cameras has Nikon really been driving for video shooters versus Sony? Just about every camera that's offered video, they've been marketing to video shooters or hybrid shooters alike. So, it's just one of those things, but it's just interesting because Nikon, we talked to a local high school here in town, and they were all Nikon. And I remember being like, and when
they were early Nikon users.
Or yeah. And it was, for me, I was like, you guys are shooting, but it's because I think the mindset came from photography, and well, they're a great photography camera, and that we need that first, and now we want videos. We're doing this, and I mean, it's for a high school class, the equipment they have, it's pretty fantastic, and the teacher does a great job. But they're Nikon shooters, and it's just funny because I've talked to kids that have come out of the class that are now in college that have been want to be interns for us and stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, Nikon. They're all excited about Nikon. I'm like, wow, you're the first video shooter I've ever had that's excited about this, and it's just because they came in it, so it's like my view of Nikon is different because I've had, there's been a lot of my history. Nikon wasn't even part of an option, wasn't even something you would consider. Whereas like someone getting into the world now, it's just another one of those mirrorless cameras. So it's one of the ones to choose from. So
what the newer version of that actually is right now is Fuji.
Oh yeah, Fuji, exactly. Like they're just, and that wasn't on the list either. Fuji,
XT4 right now is
XT4 is just a real exciting camera, and they're making them APS-C sensors, not going into full frame. Everybody wanted a full frame, but
they said we will not make a full frame camera. Wasn't that them?
Yeah, it totally was. And it kind of reminds me of what Panasonic's commitment to the Micro Four Thirds is like. No, we think it's good. Now, I think Panasonic has since caved. I mean, I know they have.
They make a full frame.
They make full frame, but they're like bigger than DSLR mirrorless cameras. But it's. They're good value. I mean, they're sub $2,000 cameras. Like the XT4 has everything they've ever offered in a $1,600 camera, and they have lots of lenses for them. It's not like other manufacturers that they have to make a new lens mount for. Nikon, Canon, they had to make a new lens mount, and they have to go through making lots of lenses. Whereas, I mean, I just tried out the XT4, and I had to. They wanted a list of lenses, and I was like, oh, there's like 30 different lenses. There's full set of primes. There's all
they've been making cameras for a long time.
Yeah, and with the X mount and all the rest, it's been around for a good amount of time. So it's a good one to consider. Just like the Micro Four Thirds was, the lenses are cheaper because they don't have to cover the full frame, and of course you're paying less for the camera because it doesn't. Making a full frame sensor, like that sensor is really a big part of the expense of the camera. It's not cheap to make these larger sensors. It's a lot easier to make the smaller ones.
So maybe the only one that we haven't gotten into that I don't want to say it doesn't deserve to be gotten into. I guess maybe Olympus. Olympus is technically in the video space, but
and they have the OEM. OEM 1, and I think they have a couple other since. They're just in essence the same as the GH5. They have IBIS. They shoot the same internal 10-bit. They're really hand in hand. It's like kind of reminds me of like the GM versus Chevy of the same like car. It's like they have a different model name, they have a different brand name, but they're exactly the same vehicle.
Okay, so even they're up there.
And they are, but they just don't have a whole lot of. They don't have a lot of offerings, right? Like same with like Fuji didn't have a whole lot of cameras to choose from that were good. Now they do, whereas Olympus just has that. But Olympus has a really amazing Micro Four Thirds lens options, and I'm glad they're still making them because they're by far the nicest for the money in the category. And we haven't talked about Blackmagic. Blackmagic, if you're the one drawback to that is also a strength, right? Is their cinema cameras. They don't shoot photos. I mean, they might in like time lapse mode or whatever, but you're just getting, whether a screen grab from video. You might as well do that. But you get all sorts of, you get a RAW, you get to shoot in ProRes if you want. They're affordable. Where else are you going to get 4K RAW for $1,200? There's just a lot of options, but along with that are lots of drawbacks because they have to make a lot of things more affordable. So battery life's really low on most of those cameras. As all Blackmagic stuff, they have really odd form factors in their cameras. Every single one of them has been different than anything else anybody else offers.
I mean, Blackmagic has a lot of fans, and for good reason.
Totally.
I mean, there's such disruptors in this space.
A lot of value in their cameras.
Yeah, exactly. And for anyone who's on a budget, who needs an inexpensive camera that can do pretty amazing things with motion pictures, I mean, that's like as good as it gets.
Yeah, well, and it's the closest you can get to making stuff like the big dogs do. You know what I mean? Like you get in for $1,200 and you're doing stuff that the $10,000 Canon does, or what have you. So you can get into that workflow. But what I think of in this way is like, if you're shooting something and you have a budget, you're going to rely on a $1,200 camera to get that done. I'm a little skeptical that if you put those to daily work, that you would be continuing to make money with that gear over time. I
think we need to hear from people who are doing this, I guess, then, right?
Well, all I know is the camera that we hardly use and now doesn't work very well, our Ursa Mini. It's behind Mike right now.
It had an audio issue, right?
Yeah, it's the mic inputs now squeal, and
I'm sure. We could probably get it fixed.
Yeah, I mean, it might be cheap to get fixed or whatever.
And we used that for a long time as like the daily driver around here.
Totally. The big thing is just there's a give and take to a cost of something. If you pay less money, it's not going to last as long. That makes good sense.
Unless you're buying a Toyota.
Yeah, or a Subaru, right?
Yeah, that's right.
They've gotten us on that marketing too, haven't they? It used to be Honda in this. Now Honda's not the brand for the 200,000 miles type of thing. Although it still is.
Not?
No, I think they are. They're just not
Honda Civics are popular cars. Huh?
Yeah, I guess it is pretty. But they're not as. They used to be a number one brand, whereas like Toyota. Wait, we're talking about cars. Yeah. I love cars. We don't need to talk about cars.
Okay, well, maybe we'll call it there for today. So hope you guys enjoyed this sort of bonus episode this week. We'll be back at the normal schedule next week.
If you like this format, let us know. If you have more questions, let us know.
Yeah.
We like this because it's going to be easy to make into clips. So that's kind of our motive here. And of course, Mike and I can just go at it and talk about these things. And we really we like answering the questions. And we've been looking for a forum to make that happen. And I think this is going to hopefully speak to that. And it's easy for us to make. So,
Yeah, that's right. So if you have questions for us in the future, if you're watching this on YouTube, you could just put the question in the YouTube comment.
Yeah.
Otherwise, email us, editor@videomaker.com, and it will make its way to us for a podcast in the future. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Again, if you like the podcast, we'd love it if you went over to iTunes and gave us a 5-star review. For Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker Podcast. We'll catch you next time.